Let's talk more about the situation in Gaza. We're joined by Sari Bashi, who is with Human Rights Watch. A very good evening to you, Sari. Good to have your time tonight. So, Al-Shifa hospital now basically unable to operate as a result of it running out of fuel, primarily due to Israel blocking fuel supplies into the Gaza Strip, which it says would only benefit Hamas. But we've also been hearing in the last few hours that people, including medical staff, who've tried to move within the hospital premises have been attacked. What can you tell us about that?
I'm very concerned about a flouting of international humanitarian law protections for civilians by the Israeli military. So beginning a few weeks ago, the Israeli military claimed that hospitals and other medical facilities in Gaza are being used for military purposes. We have not been able to verify those claims. If true, that would be a grave violation of the laws of war by the Palestinian armed groups who are allegedly doing that. But even if the other side violates their obligations to protect civilians, that doesn't mean that you can violate your obligations to protect civilians. Hospitals have special protections under international humanitarian law because of the critical role they play in saving lives. In this case, nearly 30,000 people have been injured in Gaza over the last couple of weeks, in addition to every other sick person or person needing medical care in Gaza. These attacks on hospitals are among the worst kinds of willfully ignoring basic principles of humanity by protecting medical staff and protecting hospitals.
And there's also been a claim by the Israeli government that basically Al-Shifa hospital is one of the core sites for the Hamas military operations within the Gaza Strip. How much concrete evidence has been produced to actually prove that?
We are not able to evaluate the veracity of those claims. We've seen a couple of videos from the Israeli military. I don't know. But what I can say is that regardless of any military use that a hospital is being inappropriately put to, if that's true, hospitals do not lose their protections because they're being put to military use. The laws are very stringent. A hospital can only lose its civilian protections if it's being used to commit acts harmful to the enemy. And even then, warnings must be given, and those warnings must be effective. If you tell people to evacuate the hospital, but there's no way to evacuate the hospital safely because you are firing on the hospital, that's not an effective warning, and that's not what the laws of war tell you to do. Beyond that, people are dying in Shifa Hospital because there's no electricity to power ventilators, incubators, life support machines. And there's no electricity because the Israeli military cut the electricity to Gaza and has blocked all fuel shipments into Gaza, even though fuel is life-saving. Mm-hmm. That is a violation of the laws of war. It's a war crime to deliberately impede life-saving relief supplies like fuel.
And all the people dependent on Shifa Hospital for medical care at this point, including the babies who've been taken out of their incubators because the hospital is unable to keep them running, are they now all basically doomed to die?
Oh my God, I hope not. You know, none of this is inevitable. This war is being watched so closely and so carefully, including by the United States, which is arming the Israeli government and providing it with backing. And there are countries like South Africa that have relations with the United States, that have an opportunity to clarify what morality is, what the laws of war mean. You know, South Africa, in my opinion, appropriately has been asked to back United States condemnation of some of the atrocities that the Russian military has been committing in Ukraine. South Africa should make clear that it stands against all violations of the laws of war, all floutings of protections of civilians, whether that's in Ukraine or whether that's in Gaza, and that it expects the United States to be consistent, as I would hope South Africa would be.
I wonder how much you think such interventions, even if South Africa were to become involved, to what extent they might be successful, because there have been weeks now of calls for a ceasefire, getting in humanitarian aid. That too has only happened at a trickle. So if that has failed, what can work now?
It has failed because the United States has not insisted on it. The United States, in an ordinary time, is giving the Israeli military $3.8 billion worth of aid every year in weapons and other supplies that are now being used in Gaza. Human Rights Watch and others have asked the United States and other countries to stop arming both the Israeli military as well as Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Because if the international community and the backers of these warring parties cut off the military aid, they will not be able to continue harming civilians in the way that they are. This can be stopped. And I believe every country in the world has a role to play in getting the United States to set limits for what its ally is doing.
Does Human Rights Watch, though, view the United States government as complicit in the alleged war crimes committed in Gaza recently?
Countries that provide arms to Israel, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas, knowing the likelihood that these weapons, the significant likelihood that these weapons will be used to commit war crimes, risk being complicit. I'm talking about the United States, Germany, Canada, the UK, and Iran, all of whom are arming the parties in the current conflict.
I want to go back, just shortly to the situation around Al-Shifa Hospital and the babies there, because last night or yesterday, Saturday, there was some communication apparently coming from the Israeli government saying that there would be help, aid in getting the babies who've now been taken out of the incubators to safety somehow. Do you know if that's actually materialized?
I'm not aware that the children have been evacuated. I am aware that every minute that goes by, there are additional reports of more patients dying. If the Israeli military wants to help those babies, it can restore life-saving fuel and other humanitarian supplies, not just to Shifa, but throughout Gaza. In all previous hostilities, the Israeli military has opened its commercial crossing with Gaza for life-saving aid to enter on trucks. It can and should do that now, and it should stop blocking fuel from entering. It should fulfill its obligations to facilitate the speedy delivery of humanitarian aid everywhere, including in northern Gaza. The civilians who stay behind in Shifa in northern Gaza because they cannot or will not leave retain their civilian protections, and the Israeli military retains its obligations to supply them with humanitarian assistance.
And what about those 4-hour pauses which were announced last Thursday, where there would be a pause in fighting to allow people, civilians, these Palestinians, to move from one area to the next where they're told it's safe, but we're hearing at the moment some saying, well, nowhere is actually safe because even along the routes you may actually become a victim of the airstrikes. Are those 4-hour pauses making a difference on the ground?
I mean, look, if there's some more ability for people to move around, it's better than nothing. But those pauses have not created safe routes for civilians fleeing. We are aware of civilians who have been killed trying to flee. And there are many civilians who cannot flee because they have elderly parents, because they have disabilities, because they cannot walk the kilometers and kilometers needed to get there, because the Israeli military is not letting them ride in vehicles. And anyway, there's no fuel. If people choose to stay because they make impossible choices of where they will be safer, or if they can't leave because they're elderly, because they're sick, they still need to be protected.
Sari Bashi, good to speak to you. Sari Bashi is with Human Rights Watch, speaking to us about the situation in Gaza more than a month since fighting broke out there following the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th. Now more than 11,000 people dead in Gaza, over 1,400 dead in Israel.
Yeah, those figures continue to be devastating, really.
Staggering.
Yeah.